I never thought a handful of dust would nearly bankrupt me. But that's exactly what happened when Patricia Morrison decided my gravel driveway was her personal crusade. It started on a Tuesday morning in late March, when I was sitting at my kitchen table in my house in Scottsdale, Arizona, trying to enjoy my coffee and the view of the mountains. I'm James Hendricks, and I'd moved into the Sunset Ridge development 6 months earlier, thinking I'd finally found a peaceful place to settle down after my divorce. The house was perfect. 3 bedrooms, a decent backyard, and best of all, it sat on a corner lot with a long gravel driveway that curved up from the street. I loved that driveway. It had character, a rustic charm that reminded me of my grandfather's ranch in Wyoming. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I figured it was probably a delivery. Instead, I opened the door to find a woman in her mid-50s with a helmet of blonde hair that looked like it had been shellacked into place. She wore a crisp white blouse and khaki pants, and she held a clipboard like it was a weapon. "James Hendricks?" she asked, though it sounded more like an accusation than a question. "That's me. Can I help you?" "I'm Patricia Morrison, president of the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association. We need to discuss your property violation." My stomach sank. I'd heard stories about HOAs, but the paperwork I'd signed when buying the house had seemed reasonable enough. Nothing too crazy, just the usual stuff about keeping your lawn mowed and not painting your house neon pink. "What violation?" I asked, genuinely confused. I kept my place neat. The grass was green, the bushes were trimmed, and I'd even power washed the front walkway the previous weekend. Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. "Your gravel driveway is creating excessive dust that's affecting the neighborhood's air quality and property values. I've received 3 complaints from neighbors in the past 2 weeks. I blinked at her. "Dust? From my driveway?" "Yes, every time you or your guests drive in and out, clouds of dust billow into the street and onto neighboring properties. It's unacceptable." She flipped through the papers on her clipboard with aggressive efficiency. "According to Section 7.3 of the HOA bylaws, all driveways must be maintained in a manner that doesn't create a nuisance to other residents." "The driveway was here when I bought the house," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "It's been here for at least 15 years, according to the previous owner." "That may be true, but the previous owner wasn't creating as much dust. You seem to have more traffic coming and going." Her eyes narrowed. "Do you run a business from your home? Because that would be another violation." "No, I don't run a business. I work from home sometimes, but I'm employed by a marketing firm downtown. I go to the office 3 days a week." Patricia made a note on her clipboard. "Regardless, the dust issue needs to be resolved. You have 30 days to remediate the situation, or you'll face a fine of $500. $500? For dust?" "Per week until the issue is resolved," she added, her voice taking on a satisfied tone. "The fines will continue to accrue until you bring your property into compliance with HOA standards." I felt my face getting hot. "What exactly do you expect me to do? It's a gravel driveway. There's going to be some dust." "That's not my problem. Mr. Hendricks, perhaps you should consider paving it. I'm sure that would eliminate the issue entirely." She handed me a formal notice from her clipboard, complete with photos that someone had apparently taken of my driveway, showing small puffs of dust as my truck backed out. "30 days, good morning." She turned and walked back to her white Lexus parked on the street, leaving me standing in my doorway, holding a violation notice and feeling like I'd just been sucker punched. I spent the rest of that day researching HOA laws in Arizona. Turns out, HOAs have a shocking amount of power. They can fine you, put liens on your property, and even foreclose on your house if you don't pay up. But they also have to follow their own rules and act reasonably. The question was whether Patricia's dust complaint was reasonable or just harassment. I pulled out my copy of the HOA bylaws and read through Section 7.3. It was vague, talking about nuisances and maintaining property standards, but not defining what those actually meant. There was no specific mention of driveways or dust. I took photos of my driveway from every angle, documenting its condition. The gravel was well maintained, no potholes or erosion. It looked fine to me. That evening, I walked down the street to talk to my neighbor, an older gentleman named Robert Chen, who'd lived in the development for 8 years. He was watering his roses when I approached. "Hey, Robert, can I ask you something?" "Sure, James. What's up?" "Has my driveway been bothering you?" "The dust, I mean." Robert looked genuinely confused. "Your driveway?" "No, why would it bother me? I've got a gravel driveway too on my side yard. We all get a little dust out here. It's the desert." "Patricia Morrison says she's received complaints." Robert's expression darkened. "Patricia. Of course. Look, James, I probably should have warned you when you moved in. Patricia has a thing about controlling everything in this neighborhood. She's been HOA president for 4 years, and she's run off 3 board members who disagreed with her. She likes everything to look exactly the way she wants it." "So you don't think the dust is a real problem?" "I've never noticed any dust from your place. You want my advice? Document everything. Keep records of every interaction with her. Patricia has a history of targeting people she doesn't like, and once she's got you in her sights, she doesn't let go." I thanked Robert and walked back home, my mind racing. I didn't have the money to pave my driveway. The divorce had cleaned me out, and I was still rebuilding my savings. I'd checked the cost once out of curiosity, and professional paving for a driveway my size would run somewhere between $8,000 and $12,000. That wasn't pocket change. The next day, I called a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. His name was Michael Torres, and his website promised he'd dealt with hundreds of cases in the Phoenix area. "Mr. Hendricks," Michael said over the phone, his voice calm and professional. "Let me ask you this. Was the gravel driveway disclosed in any of the HOA documents when you purchased the property?" "The driveway was there, visible in all the photos. Nobody said anything about it being a problem." "And the previous owner had the same driveway?" "Yes, for at least 15 years. That's important. In Arizona, HOAs can't selectively enforce rules. If they allowed the previous owner to have a gravel driveway without issue, they can't suddenly decide it's a violation now. That's called selective enforcement, and it's not legal." Relief flooded through me. "So I can fight this?" "You can, but I'll be honest with you. Fighting an HOA is expensive. My retainer is $3,000, and these cases can drag on for months. You might win, but you'll spend a lot of money and time doing it." My relief evaporated. I don't have $3,000 to spare right now. Then my advice is to document everything, respond to all their notices in writing, and try to work with them. Request a hearing before the HOA board. Make your case. Sometimes these things can be resolved without legal action. I thanked him and hung up, feeling defeated. I drafted a letter to the HOA requesting a hearing and explaining that the driveway had been there for years without complaint. I sent it certified mail, return receipt requested, so I'd have proof they received it. 2 weeks went by with no response. I started to hope maybe Patricia had decided to drop the whole thing. Then, on a Monday morning, I found another notice taped to my front door. This one informed me that my hearing had been scheduled for Thursday evening at 7 o'clock at the community center. It also reminded me that I now had only 16 days left to resolve the violation. Thursday evening arrived, and I showed up at the community center at 6:45, wearing a button-down shirt and carrying a folder with all my documentation. The community center was a bland building with beige walls and fluorescent lighting that made everything look slightly sickly. The meeting room had a folding table at the front where Patricia sat with 2 other board members, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who introduced himself as Dennis Walsh, the treasurer, and a nervous-looking woman in her 30s named Linda Page, the secretary. There were a few other residents scattered in the chairs, apparently there to watch the proceedings. I recognized Robert Chen, who gave me an encouraging nod. Patricia called the meeting to order with an officious rap of her knuckles on the table. "We're here to discuss the violation notice issued to James Hendricks regarding his gravel driveway. Mr. Hendricks, you requested this hearing. Please, make your statement." I stood up, my mouth dry. "Thank you. I want to address this violation notice. First, the gravel driveway in question has been part of my property for at least 15 years. The previous owner maintained it without any complaints from the HOA. Second, I've spoken with my neighbors, and none of them have complained about dust. Third, the HOA bylaws don't specifically prohibit gravel driveways or mention dust as a violation. I believe this notice is an example of selective enforcement and doesn't reflect a legitimate nuisance." Patricia didn't even look at the documents I'd brought. "Mr. Hendricks, The previous owner is irrelevant. We're addressing current conditions. Multiple residents have complained about the dust from your driveway affecting their properties. Can you tell me who made these complaints? I asked. That information is confidential. How can I address concerns if I don't know who made them or what specifically they're complaining about? Dennis, the treasurer, shifted uncomfortably. Patricia, maybe we should provide some details. Patricia shot him a look that could have frozen lava. The complaints are documented, and that's sufficient. Mr. Hendricks, the board has reviewed your case, and we stand by the violation notice. You have 16 days to pave your driveway or face weekly fines of $500. Pave my driveway? That would cost me over $10,000. That's not reasonable. The cost of compliance isn't the HOA's concern. You chose to live in a community with standards. Those standards must be maintained. Linda, the secretary, spoke up hesitantly. Patricia, I drove by Mr. Hendricks's house yesterday, and I didn't see any dust. The driveway looks fine to me. Patricia's face reddened. Linda, we've already discussed this. The board has made its decision. But I'm on the board, and I don't remember voting on this, Linda said, her voice getting stronger. When did we vote? I made an executive decision as president, which is within my authority during urgent situations. Urgent? I couldn't keep the disbelief out of my voice. We're talking about dust. How is that urgent? Patricia stood up, her hands flat on the table. Mr. Hendricks, this hearing is over. The violation stands. You will comply or face the consequences. I looked at Dennis and Linda. Dennis was staring at his hands. Linda looked upset but didn't say anything else. I realized this whole hearing had been a farce. Patricia had already made up her mind, and the other board members were either intimidated or complicit. Fine, I said, gathering my folder, but I'm going to file a formal complaint about this process. This isn't how an HOA is supposed to operate. You're free to do that, Patricia said with a thin smile. Good evening, Mr. Hendricks. I walked out of that meeting furious. Robert caught up with me in the parking lot. I'm sorry, James. I tried to warn you. Patricia's been doing this kind of thing for years. How does she get away with it? Most people just cave. It's easier to comply than to fight. The few who have fought usually end up moving rather than dealing with the constant harassment. Robert put a hand on my shoulder. Look, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm planning to move next year. I'm tired of dealing with her. My advice? Do what she wants or sell the house. I know that's not fair, but it's reality. I drove home feeling like I was trapped. I couldn't afford to pave the driveway. I couldn't afford to fight the HOA in court. And I definitely couldn't afford to sell my house and move again so soon after buying it. I'd lose money on the sale, and I'd already been through enough upheaval with the divorce. That weekend, I started calling paving companies to get quotes, hoping maybe I could find an affordable option. The first 3 companies I called gave me estimates between $9,000 and $12,000, exactly what I'd feared. The 4th company, a smaller outfit called Desert Paving Solutions, quoted me $8,000, which was the lowest bid but still way more than I could afford. I was sitting on my patio Sunday evening, drinking a beer and staring at my driveway like it was my enemy, when my phone rang. It was Linda Page, the HOA secretary. The HOA. Mr. Hendricks? This is Linda from the HOA board. I hope you don't mind that I'm calling you. I got your number from the directory. No, it's fine. What can I do for you? I wanted to apologize for what happened at the hearing. I don't think Patricia is handling this fairly. I've been on the board for 6 months, and I'm starting to see a pattern of behavior that concerns me. What kind of pattern? Linda hesitated. Patricia targets certain homeowners for violations that she ignores in others. Last year, she went after a single mother for having a trampoline in her backyard. The mom ended up having to sell it, even though there are 3 other trampolines in the neighborhood that Patricia doesn't care about. And there was an older couple she fined repeatedly for having weeds in their rocks, even though they were in their 80s and couldn't physically keep up with the maintenance. Why doesn't anyone stop her? Because she controls the board. Dennis does whatever she says because he's afraid of her. I've tried to push back, but I'm outvoted every time. And honestly, I'm afraid she'll come after me next if I make too much trouble. So what am I supposed to do? I did some research. There are several gravel driveways in this neighborhood. I drove around and counted at least 6. Patricia lives on the other side of the development, so she probably doesn't notice them. but they're there. If she's targeting you specifically while allowing others to have gravel driveways, that's selective enforcement. You could use that as evidence. I felt a spark of hope. Would you be willing to testify to that if it came to it? Another long pause. I don't know. I need to think about it. But I wanted you to have that information. Maybe you can take photos and document the other driveways. That might be enough to make Patricia back down. Thank you, Linda. I really appreciate this. After we hung up, I grabbed my camera and drove through the neighborhood. Linda was right. I found 6 other properties with gravel driveways. Some were even in worse condition than mine, with more visible dust potential. I photographed each one carefully, noting the addresses. Monday morning, I drafted another letter to the HOA, this time including photos of the other gravel driveways and citing selective enforcement. I pointed out that Section 12.2 of the bylaws explicitly stated that rules must be enforced uniformly across all properties. I sent the letter certified mail and copied it to all 3 board members. 3 days later, I received a response. It wasn't what I expected. The letter, signed by Patricia Morrison on behalf of the HOA board, stated that they had reviewed my complaint and determined that the other gravel driveways I'd photographed were not creating the same dust issues as mine. Therefore, no selective enforcement was occurring. My violation stood, and I now had only 9 days to comply. They also informed me that if I continued to file frivolous complaints, I could be fined for harassing the HOA board. I stared at the letter in disbelief. They were threatening to fine me for complaining about being fined. The absurdity of it would have been funny if it wasn't ruining my life. That evening, I did something I'd been avoiding. I called my ex-wife, Wendy Valdez. We'd been divorced for 2 years, and our relationship was cordial but distant. Wendy had gotten her real estate license after the divorce and was now a successful agent in Phoenix. "James, is everything okay?" Her voice carried genuine concern, which made me feel both grateful and sad. "I'm having some trouble with my HOA. I know you deal with this stuff in your work. Can I pick your brain?" "Of course. What's going on?" I explained the whole situation. Wendy listened without interrupting, which was something I'd always appreciated about her. When I finished, she let out a low whistle. "James, this woman sounds like a nightmare. I've seen HOAs like this before. They get power-hungry board members who treat the neighborhood like their personal fiefdom. So what do I do? Honestly, your best option is probably to pave the driveway." My heart sank. "I don't have $8,000, Wendy. You know the divorce left me strapped." "I know, but fighting this could cost you more in the long run. Those fines add up fast. If you don't pay them, they can put a lien on your property. Eventually, they can even foreclose." She paused. "Look, I might be able to help. I've got some connections with contractors. Let me make some calls and see if I can get you a better price." "You'd do that? We may not be married anymore, but that doesn't mean I want to see you lose your house. Let me see what I can do." 2 days later, Wendy called me back with news. She'd found a contractor who owed her a favor and was willing to do the job for $6,000, which included materials and labor. It was still a huge chunk of money, but it was more manageable than $8,000. "There's a catch, though," Wendy said. "He can't start for 3 weeks. He's booked solid until then." 3 weeks? That's past my deadline. The fines will already be kicking in. Can you ask for an extension?" I laughed bitterly. "I doubt it, but I'll try." I called the HOA office the next morning. Patricia answered on the 3rd ring. "Bart's, Sunset Ridge. HOA, Patricia Morrison speaking." "Patricia, this is James Hendricks. I wanted to let you know I'm arranging to have my driveway paved, but the contractor can't start for 3 weeks. Can I get an extension on the deadline?" "Absolutely not. The deadline is firm. If you're not in compliance by Monday, the fines begin." "But I'm making a good faith effort to comply. Doesn't that count for anything?" "Mr. Hendricks, I've been more than patient with you. The answer is no. If you're fined, you're fined. That's your responsibility." She hung up before I could respond. I sat there with the phone in my hand, shaking with anger and frustration. This wasn't about dust or property values. This was personal. Patricia had decided she didn't like me for some reason, and she was going to make my life miserable until I either complied completely or left the neighborhood. Monday came, and with it, my first $500 fine. I received the notice in my mailbox, printed on HOA letterhead and itemizing the violation. The letter informed me that I now owed the HOA $500, payable within 10 days, or they would begin the process of putting a lien on my property. Another $500 would be added the following Monday and every Monday after that until I fixed the problem. I called Michael Torres, the HOA attorney, again. "Mr. Hendricks, I remember you. Did you get the hearing?" "I did. It was a joke. The HOA president has already made up her mind. Now they're fining me $500 a week." "Are you prepared to hire me and fight this?" I explained about the contractor who would be paving my driveway in 3 weeks, but how I was going to rack up $1,500 in fines in the meantime. "Here's what I'd recommend," Michael said. "Document that you've hired a contractor and you're actively working to remedy the situation. Send that documentation to the HOA in writing. Request that they pause the fines given your good faith efforts. If they refuse, that shows unreasonableness on their part, which could help you if you end up in court. Will they pause the fines?" "Probably not, based on what you've told me, but the documentation will help your case. Also, go ahead and pay the fines, even though it's painful. If you don't pay, they can accelerate their collection efforts." I followed his advice. I sent a letter to the HOA with a copy of my contract with the paving company, showing that work was scheduled to begin in 3 weeks. I requested a temporary suspension of fines, given my demonstrable efforts to comply. I paid the first $500 fine with a check that made my bank account weep. Patricia's response came 3 days later. The fines would continue as scheduled, no exceptions. The second fine hit the following Monday. I paid it, watching another $500 disappear from my savings. I was eating ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches, trying to stretch every dollar. I'd even started doing delivery driving on weekends to bring in extra cash. On Wednesday of that week, something interesting happened. I got a call from Dennis Walsh, the HOA treasurer. "Mr. Hendricks, this is Dennis from the HOA board. Do you have a minute to talk?" "Sure. I want you to know that I reviewed your file, and I disagree with how Patricia is handling this situation. You've shown good faith by hiring a contractor. The fines should be suspended until the work is complete. Can you make that happen?" I tried. I called for a board vote, but Patricia says it requires a full board meeting, and she's refusing to schedule one until next month. By then, your driveway will already be paved. "So what am I supposed to do?" Dennis sighed. "Honestly, I'm thinking about resigning from the board. Patricia makes unilateral decisions and ignores the rest of us. This isn't how an HOA is supposed to function. But I wanted you to know that not everyone agrees with what she's doing to you." "I appreciate that, but it doesn't stop the fines." "I know. I'm sorry." The third Monday arrived, bringing with it my third $500 fine. I'd now paid $1,500 for the crime of having a gravel driveway that would be paved in less than a week. I was beyond angry. I was starting to feel broken, like Patricia had won, and there was nothing I could do about it. The contractor, a guy named Luis Gonzalez, showed up bright and early the following Monday morning with his crew and equipment. I'd never been so happy to see jackhammers and asphalt trucks in my life. "You must really want this driveway paved," Luis said, surveying the existing gravel. "There's nothing wrong with this gravel. It's in good shape." "HOA is fining me for dust," I explained. Luis shook his head. "I do a lot of work in HOA neighborhoods. Some of these boards are crazy. But hey, your money, your choice. We'll have you all paved up in 3 days." True to his word, Luis and his crew worked efficiently. They excavated the gravel, laid down a proper base, and began the paving process. By Wednesday afternoon, I had a beautiful, smooth asphalt driveway that probably increased my property value by several $1,000s. It also had cost me $6,000 for the work, plus $1,500 in fines, for a total of $7,500 that I hadn't planned to spend. I took photos of the completed work and sent them to the HOA with a letter stating that the violation had been remedied and requesting confirmation that no further fines would be assessed. I also requested a refund of the $1,500 in fines, arguing that they'd been excessive given my good faith efforts to comply. Patricia's response came 2 days later. The violation was closed. The fines were appropriate and would not be refunded. Case closed. I crumpled up the letter and threw it across my living room. I'd done everything they asked, paid a fortune I didn't have, and they still refused to acknowledge that they'd treated me unfairly. I felt humiliated, defeated, and angry beyond words. That weekend, I was in my garage organizing tools to distract myself when Robert Chen knocked on my open garage door. "Hey, James, the new driveway looks great." "Thanks, it cost me a fortune." "I heard. Patricia's been bragging about it to the other board members, says she brought you into compliance and that you needed to learn respect for community standards." Something in me snapped. "She said that?" "Yeah, she's actually been talking about targeting other properties now. I think your driveway gave her a taste for enforcement." I stood there, gripping a wrench, my mind racing. Patricia had pushed me around, cost me a fortune, and now she was gloating about it. And she was planning to do the same thing to other people in the neighborhood. "Robert, how do you remove an HOA board member?" Robert raised his eyebrows. "You'd need to call a special meeting of the homeowners, get enough people together to vote her out, but that requires at least 30% of homeowners to request the meeting, and then you'd need a majority vote to remove her." "Has anyone ever tried?" 3 years ago, there was an attempt. Patricia got wind of it and started threatening people with violation notices. The effort fell apart. People were too scared. "What if we tried again? What if we organized carefully and didn't let her know until it was too late to retaliate?" Robert looked thoughtful. "You'd need a lot of people on board. This neighborhood has 247 homes. You'd need at least 75 signatures just to call the meeting. Would you help me?" "James, I'm moving in a few months. I don't want to poke the bear." "But what about the people who aren't moving? What about the next person Patricia targets? Doesn't someone need to stand up to her?" Robert looked uncomfortable, but he finally nodded. "Okay, I'll help, but we need to be smart about this." Over the next 2 weeks, Robert and I quietly contacted homeowners we thought might be sympathetic. We met with people in their homes, at coffee shops, anywhere Patricia wouldn't see us gathering. We explained what had happened to me and asked if they'd experienced similar issues. The stories that came out were shocking. A young couple had been fined $2,000 for having their garbage cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours. An elderly man had been threatened with foreclosure over his lawn being half an inch too tall during a week when he'd been hospitalized. A single mother had been forced to remove a playset from her backyard because Patricia said it was visible from neighboring properties and was an eyesore. Everyone had a story. Everyone was afraid of Patricia. But slowly, people started signing our petition to call a special meeting. By the end of the 3rd week, we had 92 signatures, well over the required threshold. I drafted a formal request for a special meeting citing Section 15.6 of the HOA bylaws, which gave homeowners the right to call such meetings. The agenda was simple: a vote of no confidence in Patricia Morrison as HOA president, followed by an election for a new president if the vote passed. I sent the request via certified mail to Patricia and copied all homeowners in the neighborhood, as required by the bylaws. According to the rules, the meeting had to be held within 30 days of a valid request. Patricia's response was swift and vicious. 2 days after receiving my letter, I found a new violation notice on my door. This one claimed that my house paint color was not in compliance with HOA standards. My house was painted beige, the exact shade that had been approved by the HOA when it was built. But Patricia's notice claimed the paint had faded to an unapproved shade and needed to be repainted within 30 days or face fines of $500 per week. I wasn't the only one. Robert got a notice claiming his tree branches were overhanging his property line. 3 other people who'd signed the petition got various bogus violation notices. Patricia was retaliating, and she wasn't being subtle about it. But her tactics backfired. Instead of scaring people, it made them angry. More homeowners reached out, asking how they could help. The momentum was building. Patricia scheduled the special meeting for a Thursday evening, exactly 30 days out, the maximum time allowed. The meeting would be held at the community center, and she sent out an email to all homeowners claiming that a small group of malcontents was trying to destabilize the HOA over petty grievances. The night of the meeting arrived. I got to the community center an hour early, and the parking lot was already half full. People were showing up, Robert arrived with a laptop and a projector, which we'd planned to use to present evidence of Patricia's misconduct. By 7 o'clock, when the meeting was scheduled to start, the room was packed. There had to be at least 150 people there, far more than I'd expected. Patricia sat at the front table with Dennis and Linda, looking composed, but with a tightness around her eyes that suggested she was nervous. She called the meeting to order, rapping on the table. This special meeting has been called by James Hendricks and others to address what they claim are issues with HOA leadership. Mr. Hendricks, you have the floor. I stood up, my heart pounding. I'd prepared remarks, but standing in front of all these people made my mouth dry. Thank you all for coming. I know many of you have had frustrating experiences with our HOA. I'm here because I believe our current leadership has lost sight of what an HOA is supposed to do. We're supposed to maintain property values and create a pleasant community. Instead, we've created an environment of fear and arbitrary enforcement. I clicked to the first slide on the projector, which showed my original violation notice about the gravel driveway. 4 months ago, I received this notice about my driveway creating dust. The driveway had been there for 15 years without complaint. I was given 30 days to pave it or face $500 in weekly fines. When I hired a contractor and showed good faith compliance, the HOA refused to suspend the fines. I ended up paying $7,500 total for a problem that may not have existed. Murmurs went through the crowd. I clicked to the next slide, showing photos of other gravel driveways in the neighborhood. These driveways exist throughout our community. None of them received violation notices. This is selective enforcement. Patricia stood up. Mr. Hendricks, your driveway was creating documented complaints from neighbors. The other driveways were not. Then produce the complaints, I said. Show us who complained and what they said. Because I talked to my neighbors, and none of them had any issues with my driveway. That information is confidential. It's convenient that all the evidence supporting your position is confidential, isn't it? I turned back to the audience. But my situation isn't unique. Many of you have experienced similar targeting. I had asked several homeowners in advance if they'd be willing to speak. A woman in her 60s stood up, her voice shaking but firm. Patricia fined my husband and me $3,000 because she said our desert landscaping wasn't maintained properly. We're on a fixed income. Those fines nearly bankrupted us. Meanwhile, other homes in the neighborhood have the same landscaping, and they've never been fined. A younger man stood up. I got a violation notice for having a commercial vehicle parked in my driveway. I drive a pickup truck for work. It has a company logo on the door. Patricia said it violated the rules against running a business from home. But I don't run a business from home. I just drive a company truck. When I pointed out that 3 board members also park company vehicles in their driveways, she said that was different. More people stood up, one after another, sharing their stories. The common thread was clear. Patricia enforced rules selectively, targeting people she didn't like while ignoring identical violations by others. The fines were excessive and often impossible to satisfy, and she used the threat of liens and foreclosure to intimidate people into compliance. Patricia tried to maintain control, interrupting people and claiming their stories were exaggerated or inaccurate, but the sheer volume of similar experiences was damning. Finally, Linda Page, the secretary, stood up. She looked pale but determined. I need to say something. I've been on this board for 8 months, and I've watched Patricia operate. Everything these people are saying is true. She makes decisions unilaterally and then claims board approval. She targets specific homeowners for enforcement while ignoring the same issues elsewhere, and she retaliates against anyone who questions her. Patricia's face went red. Linda, you're out of order. No, I'm not. I'm a board member, and I have a right to speak. 2 months ago, I asked Patricia for documentation of the complaints against Mr. Hendricks's driveway. She refused to provide them. I believe that's because they don't exist. Patricia decided she didn't like his gravel driveway and manufactured a reason to force him to pave it. The room erupted in conversation. Dennis Walsh stood up, looking miserable. I want to apologize to everyone here. I've gone along with Patricia's decisions because I didn't want conflict, but I've enabled behavior that was wrong. I should have stood up sooner. Patricia was on her feet, her voice sharp. This is ridiculous. I've served this community for 4 years. I've maintained property values and enforced standards that keep this neighborhood desirable. If people don't like the rules, they shouldn't have bought homes in an HOA community. But you're not enforcing the rules fairly, I said. That's the whole point. An HOA can have rules, but they have to apply them consistently to everyone. I move that we call the vote, Robert Chen said from the back of the room. Let's vote on whether Patricia Morrison should be removed as HOA president. The vote was conducted by paper ballot to ensure privacy. Linda and Dennis, as the other board members, counted the votes while Patricia sat in stony silence. The final tally was announced 30 minutes later. 128 votes to remove Patricia, 42 votes to keep her in place. Patricia stood up, gathered her papers, and walked out of the community center without another word. The room burst into applause. We held an immediate election for a new president. Robert Chen was elected by acclamation, despite his protests that he was planning to move. I'll serve for 6 months until we can hold proper elections, he said. That'll give us time to reform how this board operates. Over the next few weeks, the new board began the process of reviewing all outstanding violation notices and fines. They discovered that Patricia had issued over 300 violations in the past 2 years, far more than the previous boards had issued in similar time periods. Many of the violations were questionable or selectively enforced. The board voted to refund fines in cases where selective enforcement could be demonstrated. That included my $1,500. They also drafted new policies requiring board votes for all violation notices and establishing an independent appeals process. I thought that was the end of the story. I'd gotten my money back, Patricia was gone, and the neighborhood was returning to normal. But then Linda Page called me with disturbing news. James, I've been going through the HOA financial records as part of the transition, and something doesn't add up. There's money missing. What do you mean, missing? Patricia had sole access to the HOA bank accounts. Over the past 18 months, there have been numerous transfers from the HOA operating account to an account listed as Maintenance Reserve. But when I checked, the Maintenance Reserve account barely has any money in it. Tens of thousands of dollars are unaccounted for. My stomach dropped. Are you saying Patricia stole money from the HOA? I'm saying we need to investigate. This could be accounting errors, or it could be something worse. I've contacted our HOA attorney, and he's recommending we bring in a forensic accountant. The forensic accountant was brought in, and what he found was stunning. Over the course of 3 years, Patricia had embezzled over $78,000 from the HOA. She'd done it through a series of fake vendor accounts and inflated service contracts. The maintenance reserve transfers were going to a personal account she'd set up under a business name that she controlled. The new HOA board filed a police report. The Scottsdale Police Department assigned a detective named Sarah Kim to the case. Detective Kim was thorough and professional, and she quickly built a case against Patricia. I gave a statement to the police, detailing my experience with Patricia's targeting and selective enforcement. So did dozens of other homeowners. The pattern that emerged showed Patricia using her position not just to embezzle funds, but also to retaliate against anyone who questioned her access to HOA money. 3 months after the special meeting, Patricia Morrison was arrested at her home and charged with theft, fraud, and embezzlement. The amounts involved pushed the charges into felony territory. The local news covered the story, and it became something of a scandal in Scottsdale's HOA community. I attended Patricia's preliminary hearing, sitting in the back of the courtroom. She looked smaller somehow, less formidable without her clipboard and her position of power. Her attorney tried to argue that the transfers were legitimate HOA expenses, but the prosecution had records showing the money went to personal accounts and was used for personal expenses like vacations and car payments. The judge wasn't sympathetic. Patricia was bound over for trial, and her bail was set at $50,000. The case went to trial 8 months later. I was called as a witness to testify about Patricia's behavior as HOA president and the selective enforcement I'd experienced. The prosecution argued that Patricia's targeting of homeowners like me was part of a pattern of behavior designed to distract from her financial crimes and punish anyone who asked too many questions about HOA finances. The jury deliberated for 2 days and came back with a guilty verdict on all counts. Patricia was sentenced to 4 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, which amounted to $78,000 plus interest and fees. Standing outside the courthouse after the sentencing, I ran into Linda Page. "We did it," she said, looking relieved and exhausted. "You did it," I corrected. "If you hadn't found the missing money, she'd still be out there. If you hadn't stood up to her in the first place, I never would have had the courage to look. You started this, James." I thought about that as I drove home. I hadn't wanted any of this. I'd just wanted to live peacefully in my house with my gravel driveway. But sometimes you don't get to choose your battles. Sometimes they choose you. The HOA used the restitution money from Patricia to pay back all the excessive fines she'd levied over the years. I got my $1,500 back, which helped, though it didn't make up for the stress and expense of the whole ordeal. Robert Chen ended up staying on as HOA president for a full year instead of 6 months. Under his leadership, the board implemented reforms that made the HOA more transparent and accountable. Violation notices required board votes, fines were standardized and reasonable. Homeowners had a real appeals process. The neighborhood became what an HOA was supposed to be, a community organization that protected property values without tyrannizing residents. My paved driveway, the source of all this chaos, remained smooth and dust-free. Sometimes I missed the gravel and the way it crunched under my tires, connecting me to memories of my grandfather's ranch. But mostly I was just glad the whole nightmare was over. A year after Patricia's conviction, I was working in my front yard when a car pulled up and a young couple got out. They were house hunting in the neighborhood, they explained, and wanted to know what it was like to live in Sunset Ridge. "It's a good neighborhood," I told them honestly. "The HOA had some problems, but they've been cleaned up. The board is reasonable now. They enforce the rules fairly and they actually care about the community." "We heard there was some kind of scandal with the previous HOA president," the woman said. "There was. She's in prison now for embezzlement, but that's all in the past. The current board is completely different." They thanked me and drove off to look at houses. I went back to trimming my bushes, thinking about how strange the past year and a half had been. A handful of dust from a gravel driveway had led to a complete upheaval of our HOA, criminal charges, and ultimately a better community. That evening, Wendy called to check in. We'd stayed in touch more frequently since she'd helped me with the paving contractor. "I saw that Patricia Morrison got sentenced," she said. 4 years, that's significant. She deserved it. She stole almost $80,000 and made a lot of people miserable in the process. "How are you doing?" "I'm good, actually. Better than I've been in a long time. The HOA situation is resolved. The neighborhood is peaceful. Work is going well. I'm even thinking about dating again." "That's great, James. I'm happy for you." "Thanks for everything, Wendy. Your help with the contractor made a huge difference." "What are ex-wives for?" she said with a laugh. After we hung up, I poured myself a bourbon and went out to my back patio. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. My house was quiet, my driveway was perfect, and my HOA was functioning like it should. I thought about sending Patricia the paving bill, like the title of this story suggested I might. In reality, I never did. By the time the criminal investigation was underway, sending her a bill seemed petty and unnecessary. The justice system was handling things, and she was facing far more serious consequences than a snarky invoice from me. But there was a certain poetic justice in how things had worked out. Patricia had forced me to pave my driveway, costing me thousands of dollars I couldn't afford. That act of petty tyranny had been the catalyst that united the neighborhood against her. If she'd just left me alone, if she'd exercised her power reasonably and fairly, she might have stayed HOA president for years. She might have continued embezzling HOA funds without anyone noticing. Instead, her need to control everything and punish anyone who didn't immediately comply had been her downfall. The dust from my gravel driveway had kicked up a storm that swept her away. I raised my glass to my smooth paved driveway, visible from where I sat. "Thanks for the adventure," I said to it. "Let's not do that again." The neighborhood settled into a comfortable routine. The new board held regular meetings that were actually productive instead of being platforms for Patricia's dictates. Homeowners started attending meetings and participating in community decisions. We formed committees to organize neighborhood events and maintain common areas. Dennis Walsh, the former treasurer who'd gone along with Patricia for too long, worked hard to rebuild trust. He created a monthly financial transparency report that showed all HOA income and expenses, posted on the community website for any homeowner to review. It was a level of openness we'd never had before. Linda Page became the new HOA president after Robert's term ended. She was thoughtful, fair, and genuinely interested in serving the community rather than controlling it. Under her leadership, the neighborhood thrived. As for me, I settled into the life I'd hoped for when I first moved to Sunset Ridge. I made friends with neighbors, hosted barbecues in my backyard, and finally felt like I was part of a community. The whole ordeal with Patricia and the driveway became a story I'd tell at those barbecues, a crazy chapter that had ultimately led to positive change. On the anniversary of Patricia's sentencing, the HOA held a community picnic at the park. It was a beautiful spring day, and nearly every household sent representatives. There were games for kids, food trucks, and a general atmosphere of celebration. Robert Chen found me near the food tables, balancing a plate of barbecue and a beer. "Can you believe this?" he asked, gesturing at the crowd. "A year ago, people were afraid to even talk to each other about HOA issues. Now look at us." "It's amazing what happens when people aren't living in fear," I agreed. "You know, I never thanked you properly. If you hadn't fought back against Patricia, I would have just moved away and left everyone else to deal with her. You showed me that standing up to bullies actually works." "I had help, a lot of help. I couldn't have done it alone." "Maybe not, but you started it. That takes courage." Linda Page took the microphone near the playground and welcomed everyone to the picnic. She gave a brief speech about community and working together, and she acknowledged the difficult period we'd gone through the previous year. "We learned some hard lessons," Linda said. "We learned that HOAs can do real harm when they're not properly managed. We learned that silence enables bad behavior. And we learned that when a community comes together, we can create real change. I'm proud of this neighborhood and everyone in it." The crowd applauded. Kids ran around playing tag. The smell of grilled food filled the air. It was everything a community gathering should be. Later that evening, as I walked home through the quiet streets of Sunset Ridge, I passed my neighbor's house with its gravel-side driveway, untouched and unmolested by HOA enforcement. I passed another house with a trampoline in the backyard, visible from the street and perfectly acceptable under our current board's reasonable interpretation of the rules. I reached my own house and stood for a moment looking at my paved driveway, smooth and dark in the fading light. It really was a nice driveway. Luis and his crew had done excellent work. And while I'd resented paying for it at the time, I could admit now that it did look good and probably had increased my property value. But more than that, that driveway represented something important. It represented the price of standing up for what's right. It represented the cost of challenging injustice. And it represented the beginning of positive change that had improved life for hundreds of families in my neighborhood. Was it worth $7,500 to learn those lessons and create that change? Looking around at my peaceful neighborhood, thinking about Patricia behind bars and a reformed HOA board in place, I had to admit it probably was. I walked inside my house, closed the door on the day, and smiled. The whole crazy saga of the gravel driveway was finally, truly over. And somehow, despite all the stress and expense and conflict, I'd come out the other side in a better place than where I'd started. Sometimes life works out in unexpected ways. Sometimes a handful of dust can change everything. And sometimes the thing you fight hardest against becomes the catalyst for the change you needed most. I never did send Patricia that paving bill, but in a way, she'd paid for that driveway far more than I ever had. She'd paid with her freedom, her reputation, and her future. That seemed like bill enough.